verse 38 says, and he said to them, why are you troubled? Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Maybe that's a question that Jesus would also ask some of us today as well. You came in here with some troubles. You came in here with some doubts. And you wonder whether God is good. You wonder whether or not he's working in your life. You wonder whether or not he's abandoned you because you don't feel his presence. And you're really struggling with some trouble. And maybe he wants to ask you that same question. Why? Why are you troubled? Why do doubts arise in your heart? He's like 3 feet away from these disciples that are fearing the unknown, that are paralyzed by fear. And he asks them these questions. And then it says this, and this is where I want to focus on. He says, see my hands? You see my hands? You see my feet? That is I myself. And then he says these words. I love this. Go ahead and touch me. Go ahead and touch me. Reach out and see. Can I just make a simple observation about that passage that just jumped off the page at me this past week that made me want to change my entire sermon half midweek, which is very rare? That simple observation is this. It's easy to have peace when the Prince of Peace is standing 3 feet in front of you, asking you to touch his hands, his physical hands. It's easy to have peace when you can literally, physically touch the hands of Jesus and know without a shadow of a doubt that he's real. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine how much fear they had? Can you imagine how much worry and anxiety they had in their heart? And yet Jesus says, not only peace be with you, but I'll prove it. I'll prove that I'm here. All you have to do is reach out and touch me. You imagine in that instant, all their fears, all their worries, all their anxiety was melted away, just like that. Wouldn't that be nice? Like you're really struggling with some trouble in your life. Doubts start to flood your heart. Trouble starts to invade your life. And Jesus shows up at the instant of a prayer, right? And you're just like, oh, thank God. You know, I was worried there for a second you weren't real. I was worried that you didn't love me. I was worried that you didn't care. But now I can trace your hand. I can touch your hands. I can touch your feet. Wouldn't that be great? Would be. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. And that's not our story. Unfortunately, we have something even better than that, which we'll talk about. But you and I don't have the luxury that the disciples had when the bottom drops out and fears arise in our hearts and doubts start to flood us, to be able to trace the hands of God. And that can be tough because literally you can't do that. Figuratively, it's even harder to understand God's hand in your life, where he's leading you, where he's guiding you, why bad things happen to you. It's very difficult to understand that. And so, here's the question. What do you do? What do you do when you can't trace God's hand? What do you do when you can't trace the hands of God in your life? To answer that question, let me share a story with you. It's a testimony from a pastor that I recently read. It's really gripping, but the story of Frank, a guy named Frank and his wife Debbie. And it was 4th of July, 1986. So this is a while ago. But Frank leaned across the hospital bed of his 27-year-old wife, whose unsteady breathing signaled the approaching end of her mortal life. Gripping the one hand left on a body ravaged by cancer, Frank whispered into Debbie's ear, a thank you for being his wife and the mother of their 4-year-old son, Stephen. Within moments, she was gone, and Frank, who was 30 years old, was a widower. What do you do when you lose something that is so precious to your life, thought Frank. And it was a thought he would wrestle with for a long time as he sat and cried at the grave of his wife, telling God it hurt so bad that his life was spinning round and round. And at one point, Frank demanded that God give his wife back. I want her back, he said, with a full head of hair, and I don't want there to be a bum arm or a splint on her leg. I didn't bargain for this. I just want her back, God. But Frank sensed God saying in that moment, if I opened up heaven and said, okay, Debbie, you can go back, she wouldn't want to go back. She wouldn't want to go back, Frank. She's enjoying everything I ever prepared for her. Now get up and get on with your life. And sitting there, Frank remembered a quote from another whose wife was deathly ill during his ministry that said this: God is too good to be unkind, and he's too wise to be mistaken. And when you can't trace his hand, that's when you must learn to trust his heart. Isn't that good? When you can't trace the hand of God in your life, when your whole life, your whole being is paralyzed by fear, when doubt begins to flood your heart, and when you find yourself in the midst of a very troubling circumstance, and when in it all you can't trace the hand of God, you can't see what God is doing, here's what you do. You learn to trust his heart. And his heart for you as a follower of Jesus is good. That even when you can't see how he's leading, and even when you can't see how he's working, he is in your corner working for your good and his glory. And the reason why Frank and the reason why so many other believers who have put their faith in Jesus for the forgiveness of their sins can say, I trust the heart of God, even when I can't trace the hand of God, is because if he saved me, then Jesus has my good in mind.